All right, we are now recording and we are now live here at the 2020 Uplift Digital Convergence. I am joined by Kern Collymore, William Walker, Andrea Stanley, and our facilitator, Wian. I am going to go ahead and let Wian take it from here, but want to once again extend a great thank you, gracias, Sudpai solidarity to all of you watching and to all of you witnessing as we continue to engage in these conversations that are very important to our community. We will have Ashley Finley joining us later as well. She's just running a little late, but yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and pass the mic to Wian.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I apologize. My computer camera is not working for some reason, but I can hear y'all and I'm here, even though it looks like I'm not. And we are joined today by some lovely panelists for our Black Liberation panel. And I would like to invite the panelists to go ahead and introduce themselves as well. And feel free, anyone, to start.
Sure, I can go. Hello, everyone. My name is Andrea Stanley. I'm a mother and a doula. I'm Dene, Acoma Pueblo, and Honduran, specifically Afro-Latina. I'm currently living in Phoenix, Arizona. This is where I was born and raised. Yeah, so I'm just really excited to be here and to have this conversation with the other panelists.
Hi, everyone. Kern Collymore, born in Trinidad and Tobago, grew up in Staten Island, New York, and have been living on the Navajo Reservation for the past 10 years now. Do a lot of work on land restoration, water conservation, food security, and then nonviolent direct action trainings, utilizing ropes as a form of like protest. So do those trainings out on the reservation, and bringing in lots of LGBTQ, POC from around the country to have the experience out in Lupton, Arizona.
Hey, everyone,
I have 2 kids.
Oh, so sorry.
I did that on purpose, Will. I'm sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say I have two kids and a partner who's like really amazing that does a bunch of awesome work as well, and that's it. That's me.
Hey, everyone, I'm William Walker. I am a rising junior at Arizona State University. I am studying sustainability and urban planning. I'm currently located in Tempe, Arizona right now, and I'm interested in viewing sustainable development as community development and understanding how we can develop and grow people, creating equitable spaces within the environmental movement, and really advocating for intersectional environmentalism and all those great things that go within the scope of environmental justice. And that's me.
Thank you. It looks like Ashley is joining us as well. We're just, we'll probably just take a moment before Ashley can introduce themselves. For the time being, I'll just introduce myself really briefly. I'm Wian. I'm a fellow with Uplift Climate, and I will be helping facilitate this conversation today. Lyrica or Ella, if you are on the chat, if you could potentially help Ashley join as a panelist, that would be appreciated. And I will just take a few moments.
Ashley, I just sent you the link again on your email. If you go ahead and click that link, then we will see you here soon on the panel. That's it. That's the tweet. Wian, you can go ahead and take the mic back.
All right, no worries. Oh, it looks like Ashley's here. Hi, Ashley. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi. I'm Ashley. Okay, I'm assuming that it is time for me to tell you who I am. Am I correct? I'm sorry. Okay, all right. I just caught the tail end of that. Yeah, I'm Ashley Finley, currently living in Salt Lake City, Utah, originally from Los Angeles, California. I am a doula slash birth keeper. I also organize largely around reproductive justice and birth rights, also some climate work, and Black liberation. Yes, that is me.
Beautiful. Thank you all for those lovely introductions. Before we get started, I just want to take a little bit of time to invite those who are listening in that this is a Q&A, and we will be taking in those questions at the end here. And feel free to submit those questions during the panel as well, and as well as when the questions have been answered at the end. As I also want to remind y'all to take a moment of reflection before submitting a question. Some questions that might be good to ask yourself might be, what is the intention of asking this question? Or will this question be harmful? Just please be considerate of the intention of this panel here before you submit your questions. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. So the first question I have for you all today is, who are your personal heroes in Black liberation work? An extension of that is, whose work uplifts you on the road to liberation? And I invite anyone who feels ready to answer it, go ahead and go first if they would like to. I understand if you need a moment as well to think about your response.
Well, I can go. So when I think of my heroes in Black liberation, firstly, I think of people that I've met and people that are within my community. There's like so many people that are doing the wonderful work of Black liberation. And I'm thinking of like a lot of the Black women in my life, people that I'm friends with, people I'm related to, like my mother, my aunts, my grandmothers, all those people that have really poured into my life and taught me what it means to be Black, what it means to be a man, and like really how it means to like navigate these spaces while being nurtured and uplifted and being able to do that with my own community. Me just being a sustainability major and having some background within the environmental movement, I'm thinking of just a plethora of a lot of people coming in now and that have always been there that are advocating for Black liberation and BIPOC voices within these movements. I'm thinking of people like Leah Thomas, who just recently created the Intersectional Environmentalist platform. People like that who are great to look at. I'm thinking of just like all these like wonderful voices, or even historical figures that are still around today, like Angela Davis, and people we've learned about in our history books that have just done such great things. And in our time, are actually we're looking towards them and asking for advice on what they think of all of this, and how do we make sense of this, and how can we really uplift and ignite other voices.
I guess I'll go next. Yeah, I think what William said about folks in like my own community, my own family, that is, you know, like what I grew up with, right? Like my mom has always been kind of a person who's been like very, very determined, right, about her rights and about her freedom and about the freedom of her folks, you know? And so like when I think of her, I think of her as my first example. Obviously, I can talk about Audre Lorde, I can talk about Octavia Butler, I can talk about Nina Simone, poets like Nikki Giovanni, the Combahee River Collective, like all of these people are so dope. And yes, Black women are like are the North Star that guides me. Let's see, like I guess like now in modern times, I would say the work of Bree Newsome. I would say the work of the Women of Color in Solidarity Collective, and based out of New York City. Oh my gosh, of course. I'm sorry. I'm such a mess. My computer has decided to try to update. Um, so many folks. Adrienne Marie Brown, the Afro mystic, who is a conjure woman in hoodoo, talking about African traditional religions and the freedom and liberation that comes with connecting to that. Like, I don't know, there's so many. I could go on and on. I'm a fangirl. I'm a fangirl of so many people. But yeah, those are the folks uplifting me in my own community here. Like Uplift Climate, Mariella is always uplifting me and like kind of giving me the energy and love I need to keep going with amongst like so many other people. Yeah, I'll stop because I can really just like ramble off a list.
Hi, everyone. I can continue off of that. This is Kern here. He, him pronouns. You know, just building off of what Ashley and William were able to say is just, to me, just there are so many amazing Black people in this movement, right? So A, personally in our own individual lives, and then B, like on this larger scale. And it's really great. It's, you know, like William, thank you for the way that you introduced that, and not going to like the big historical names and like starting local and talking like your own family, because that to me like really opened it up to think about the activists in my life and you know, the amazing women of color who are there on the front lines. And it's not, I mean, of course there's Angela Davis and, you know, Ashanti Shakur and these, you know, Rosa Parks and Stokely Carmichael and Malcolm X's and these big names. But then, you know, when we get down to it, it is the people like our mothers, or for me, as I heard you say that, as a Caribbean immigrant to America, I didn't have a lot of family around me. My father personally like worked really hard to kind of like, you know, like the American dream lifestyle where I went to a bunch of these like white schools and these like white institutions. And I wasn't like around all of these powerful, like this, like the Black love wasn't there for me until I went to college, and being around other Black people who, you know, had similar experiences, but also had completely different experiences, and being awakened to this kind of, like Black liberation theology and like these amazing people there in my life who helped bring me along. I would definitely agree with you and say a lot of these like on the ground people have been really great mentors. And then let's really quick plug for John Brown. John Brown is a white dude who threw down for Black abolition way back in the day. And when we talk about allies, a lot of people talk about being an ally, but I feel like it's a talking point. I think John Brown is a really good example of what a white ally could and should look like. I'm done.
Thanks, Kern. I can go next. Yeah, you guys all touched upon great points. And for me, I also feel like it starts within the home and our own family. Similar to Kern, my father's family immigrated from Honduras here to the US, and my family is Afro-Latino. So my granny, she comes from the island of Utila. My grandfather's family comes from the island of Rotan. And just having that experience of having like a Central American and like Black family in Arizona, similar to Kern, I grew up going to all white schools, neighborhoods, and my family was always the only like Black and Native family most of my life. And I think my heroes are my granny, my grandpa, my aunts and uncles, and my father, because for me to come into my activism, but also to me as a woman and how I identify and how I have that foundation, like I'm privileged that I had that was instilled in me to just be proud of who I am and to spark that interest and that thirst of knowledge of like, well, who else is out there that I can look up to, because I don't have these immediate examples right in front of me in my, environment. But for me, I also really appreciate Ashley mentioning, like with birth work and these institutions that do kind of gatekeep this knowledge of, the medicalization like of our bodies. But really a lot of this, knowledge on birth or health is literally in our DNA. Like the African diaspora is international, but it was the granny midwives in the South, or it was women who brought, midwifery skills from Africa to different places in the Caribbean, like my family's from, to, the South. Like this knowledge was always passed on in different ways and taken from us. But these real heroes are a lot of these unnamed heroes that carried these different knowledges and traditions throughout the way. So yeah, we can say big names like Angela Davis, James Baldwin, and their quotes are so inspirational and helpful on a daily basis, but there are so many unnamed heroes too that are, literally why we're here today.
Wow, thank you all for those answers. I think you guys made a lot of really good points that really resonate with a lot of us, talking about heroes who are often unnamed, those who are typically doing work within the quote unquote shadows, right? But then also naming those who have more of a household name. I think it's important to shed a light on all of those community members there. And so our next question is, what does Black liberation look like to you and your communities? And then anyone who feels drawn to answer first, please feel free.
I've been I've been like really reflecting on this question, and it's so funny because the answer changes for me in any given moment, in any given day. But I will say, generally speaking, like, I'm trying to gather my thoughts, sorry, like I have a very visceral reaction when I hear the words Black liberation, because I tend to lean anti-capitalist. And so for me, liberation of Black people looks like, and I think I've said it like it's in one of my bios, but like looks like a reconnection to ancestral knowledge that existed before colonization and before capitalism, which is a really big idea, right? It's a really like kind of like, I want to say like dreamy cloud-like idea, because for a lot of colonized people and a lot of people of the African diaspora who are descendants of enslaved Africans, like what does that look like for us, right? Like the idea of reconnecting to that is a really difficult idea. But kind of, is it Andrea or Andrea? I want to make sure I'm saying it correctly.
It's Andrea.
Andrea, okay. But as Andrea said so beautifully, like we have this knowledge in our DNA, right? Ancestral knowledge is passed down to us, even when we have been disconnected, like purposely, right? Like when the system of white supremacy has disconnected us from our ancestors and from our heritage and from our ancestral practices, it still lives in us. And so this is like my whole journey, and this is the journey that I'm looking to like cultivate for myself, but also bring my people along on. And so much of that does live for me in birth work and in plant medicine and in my relationship to the earth and to the land. But specifically birth work for me, because I see it like I'm sure Andrea can attest, when a parent is having like in this sacred space, right? Like the body tends to kind of take over and knowledge tends to kind of take over. And it's just like one of the most beautiful examples that I can think of in my own experience. But also, I will say this idea of letting go of releasing the idea of one, proximity to whiteness, and two, the idea of like respectability, right? Like when we talk about, and I'm just using this term just because it's like a very current term right now, but when we talk about like Black Lives Mattering, and which Black Lives Matter, like I want us to realize that all of us do. Like that means you're like your cousin, you know, like down south with the gold tooth, your cousin with the rap sheet, you know, your auntie or uncle who may have done some unfavorable things, like their lives matter as well. Megan Thee Stallion's life matters, like as she's twerking, you know, like all of our lives matter in whichever way they exist, right? So this is an idea that I have been like so gung-ho about and so like on for real and passionate, because I'm tired of this conversation revolving around like who gets to be free, right? Like Black folks with a college degree who wear like a nice suit and go to church on Sunday mornings, like yes, they deserve to be free. But also those folks like living in South Central LA with a rap sheet, like deserve to be free. We all deserve to be free. And so this is like what Black liberation looks like to me. It means like allowing ourselves to be ourselves and to simply exist and not feel like we have to earn our keep, or to prove that we are like human and to prove that we are worthy of breathing. Like no, like let's let go of all of that shit essentially. Like no, let's stand up and say like I'm messy, I'm me, I'm not perfect, maybe I have a college degree, maybe I don't, maybe I talk a certain way, maybe I don't, but it doesn't matter, because I deserve to live, and I deserve to live freely, just simply because I was born, right? Like there's no other qualifier to that. And that's something that Black folks and people of color and people on the margins and queer people have not been able to like fully be allowed to realize, right? White folks get to realize this all of the time. Like they don't have to do anything and they're free. They don't have to do anything, and people don't constantly question whether or not they deserve to live or whether or not they deserve to die, right? But we're always inserted in these conversations. So yeah, okay, I'm gonna stop because everybody else needs a chance to talk, but that's what
I really appreciate that you brought that up, Ashley, and I really love the passion that you brought when it comes to just like really highlighting that ancestral knowledge and the people within your community. And I wholeheartedly believe that as someone who's like deeply affected by the African diaspora. And I really want to understand like how do I find my way back? Like how do I go back to those knowledge systems, and how do I respect and venerate my ancestors and the elders that are still alive today, and be able to highlight their narratives and their voices? Like there's so much that we go through. Like I'm seeing everything just like go within intergenerational trauma, and that's something that persists, and it's systemic, and it's also within our DNA, and we basically should be anti-capitalist and break down like that myth of meritocracy that we're all taught to work towards, of like you need to do this and you need to do that and you need to be like a highly contributing member of society. Like I wholeheartedly grew up with a narrative of like working twice as hard to have half as much, and I still do that on like a daily basis, you know. So what I'm hearing from what you're saying and what I've really been thinking and pondering about in like the past couple of weeks is that like when we're highlighting these voices, when we're finding our way back to these different knowledge systems, and when we just like appreciate and like understand our culture, you know, and just highlight like all BIPOC, you know, we're able to break down those generational curses. It's essentially like what I'm thinking. So that's what Black liberation looks like to me within my community. It also looks like really focusing on things in like a very systemic and systems thinking holistic type way, you know, focusing on that complexity and not telling anyone, not letting anyone tell you that like complexity is too much, you know, like there's so much, there's so many intersections that we have with like all of our identities. And I just love all the representation that I'm seeing here and how we're all able to connect to something, although we're all so different and come from such different backgrounds, you know. So I want that to be appreciated as well. And I also just like I want everything. Like I want us to like have the world as we want it. You know, I want opportunities. I want education. You know, and like not a deep colonized education at that. You know, where our systems are uplifted. You know, and I also just like want just different opportunities and meeting opportunities. And I want people growing up like little Black children just understanding like how to love themselves. You know, and everyone else that's our age and looks like us just knowing how to love themselves and have like a community. And I think through that, we can reach that Black liberation.
I can go next. So, what does Black liberation look like in my communities? So, I'll just speak more specifically from my personal experience of being mixed with Dene and Acoma Pueblo and my dad's family being Afro Latino from Honduras. And I feel like there is a lot of anti-Blackness in the Native community, um, despite, having very parallel impacts of oppression and in our histories here in this country, specifically in what's called the U.S. Um, so I think when I think of like my son or my childhood experience or other relatives that I have, liberation for Black and Indigenous people, specifically here in the Southwest, it's just having like that basic level of human respect. And how do we, like Ashley was speaking about, of just respecting people for who they are and where they're at currently, um, and whatever their socio-political status may be, but specifically in Native communities, just accepting them and loving them for who they are, especially children. Like they're a gift into our families, into our kinship systems, and at times these negative anti-Black attitudes and violence or different things are placed on them. And I think that yes, there are systematic racism that exists, in the larger society, but I think we also need to look close to home in our Native communities as well. And maybe what can we do is not, for me in my life, is just speaking up for myself and my sister, but also, having those difficult conversations with people in your family, stopping your cousins from saying the N-word, or just asking why they even say that in the first place. I tell them just say Native instead of saying the N-word, and you can still sing all of your favorite songs, whatever, your heart's desire, and it's still fun to say. But yeah, Black liberation in my communities, just because I've lived in Arizona and New Mexico my whole life. I don't really see a lot of Black people too, but that doesn't mean that we can't still offer that support and solidarity kind of in whatever communities that we're a part of, or that we navigate through, or that we're still families of too. And just another personal shout out of heroes in the Black liberation movement is Ramilla Cody. She's been one of my heroes since I was a little girl. She's the first Miss Navajo Nation to be Black in Navajo, and she's just a fierce Dene woman to this day with her organizing, with the info shop and her partner, Brandon Benali. So I just want to shout out them. But she does great work too for Black liberation in the Diné community.
Hey everyone. Yeah, I think that again, it's awesome going last because the people who go before you just really tie things together. And from Ashley to William, Andrea, again, I've been living in the Navajo Nation for the past 9 years, and I think that, you know, like for me, Black liberation has to do with our like understanding and knowing our history and having our history be known, right? And right now, the way that we find out, at least for in my mind, a lot of Black Indigenous people of color, we find about our history when we're in like college or some like Facebook meme that tells you about some badass Black person that you like never knew about. Where and I mean that like across the board, right? In Indigenous communities, we talk like I've definitely experienced like anti-Blackness, but at the same time, there are people who know their history, and it's just like it's so rich and they're so full. One of the biggest like celebrations down here in the Southwest is this like the Pueblo Revolt, and one of the things that like is really hardly talked about is like the main instigators of this Pueblo Revolt over 150 years ago were half Black, half Pueblo people, right? So today, like I'm in these Indigenous communities, and I sometimes you get this kind of like, oh, well, like Black people, there aren't that many Black people on the reservation. It's like, well, historically, that's not true, right? Like, historically, the fact that there's so many of these, natives with African-American descent obviously means there have been Black people in these communities before. And I just think that one of the problems, as Ashley mentioned earlier, is just how Blackness or just minorities in general, we are always kind of like viewed at in like juxtaposition to like white people or whiteness. So when it comes to our history amongst ourselves or amongst each other, it gets lost, right? Like the history of like Black and Mexican, like, I mean, I'm going to say South American or Mexican interactions gets lost when a lot of times before abolition, Blacks are trying to run to Mexico, right? Mexico was a refuge for Black people. Like Indigenous communities, I mean, the Seminole Wars, the Seminole Wars were fought because the Seminoles took Blacks in as their own. And the fact of the matter, I think that we've really lost that history amongst ourselves as Black people, right? And the birth work really makes me think of that. And me, I do a lot of outdoors work, and it's like you get into these circles where outdoorsiness is seen as this white like hippie thing, and it's like, yo, didn't we like survive slavery? Like, didn't we literally make it from like Mississippi to Canada? Like, didn't we run from like, right, like leave these terrible places and make it all the way down south? And now you're telling me that like Black people don't belong in the wilderness, or like the wilderness isn't a space for Black people, right? Like, or gardening or farming or planting or midwifery, right? Like these are things that we literally survived on. These are things that our people like had to do. And I think that we've just, again, relying upon like Eurocentrism, we've kind of, like lost our history, like lost our memory. And that's why we're able to be told, right, by like Eurocentric, like by Europeans, right? Like, oh, like Black people aren't in Indigenous communities, or like Black people can't be Mexican as well, or right? Like, and I have this conversation all the time. For me, working in Indigenous communities, when I'm from the Caribbean, Trinidadians, we believe we're descendants of the native people and the African slaves. But when you come to like America and you get into Indigenous communities, you start like as Blackness, as like a Black appearing person, when you start talking about Indigenous ancestries, it's just all this kind of like heeing and hawing in certain circles. And it's just, I think that for me, Black liberation would be being able to be Black, being able to be a person of color and have your identity viewed as, I think Ashley said it at the very beginning, like with humanity, right? You don't have to explain or show people why you're human because you went to an Ivy League university or because you know this person that they know. You're a human being because you're a human being. And I think that's, for me, like that's what Black liberation would look like.
Oh my gosh. Okay, sorry. I know I don't want to like, but y'all are so great. Y'all are giving me chills because, like, for real, everything that I hold close, like every one of you is kind of like touching on, right? Like this idea of liberation, like, and I almost want to say like solidarity, right? Like there's so much, like what Andrea was talking about, there's so much anti-Blackness, but like I think for me that like connects back to this idea of divesting from the lie of white supremacy, right? Like for all of us who are colonized and living on the margins and living under the like umbrella of oppression, like we have got to understand that this is a lie. It's all a lie, and everything that results as like everything that comes as a result of it is also a lie. Like this idea that we are at odds, or this scarcity mindset, or this disconnection from each other. Like, yes, we want to like talk about the diversity and the variances and what it means to be a Black person, an Indigenous person, a person of color, and all of the intersection that comes with those identities, but also like understanding that like we are here together and we have always existed together, right? And like, yes, anti-Blackness and prejudice and all of these things like have trickled their ways in, but ultimately, like, I love what Kern was talking about, like we took care of each other. We might not have understood each other wholeheartedly, but we saw kinship in each other, right? And we took care of each other because we knew that like we were the only ones that could take care of each other. Like, and so I think that like a return to that camaraderie, a return to that kinship, a return to that solidarity is something that is so powerful when we talk about liberation and what it looks like to like achieve freedom as well. So yeah, sorry.
Thank you all for your answers. Ashley, you actually made a great segue into the next question, actually. And I know that some of y'all have already touched on this, but the next question is actually, what does kinship solidarity look like to you? And I know that some of y'all have already, again, like touched on this, so feel free to offer an extension of what you've said before, or yes, and go ahead, anyone, feel free to answer it.
I really liked Ashley's answer actually within the last question, in that you perfectly touched base on this. And I think that kinship solidarity is just like knowing that like people stand with us, you know, like even if they don't identify with us, like they're at least allies and they're doing the work and they're working towards us. But like furthermore, people that I identify with, people like within my Black community, are the ones that I go to. They're the ones that I speak to. They're the ones that are on those late night FaceTime calls after a professor or somebody pissed me off and life is just hard and I'm having like a little mental breakdown. Like those are the people I go to because they understand, you know? And like having those people that are actively taking care of you, even like the people within like my family, my community, you know, and then also just like understanding, you know, even if they don't identify me or haven't been there before, you know, I identify understanding as like someone who's been through that to experience that. So there's just like not a lot of people within my life that understand me unless they've been through that certain circumstance. So I tell them like, you're not going to understand this, but like I at least need you to stand with me. I need you to understand why, where my brain is going, where my feelings are, that framework, you know, and how are we going to work together? Like, how are you going to be helping me? So, you know, having that level of like understanding if it's something you identify with, and if not, just at least being able to stand with someone and like doing more than just words, doing actions, you know, not looking for anything in advance. I see within like a lot of what's going on right now, a lot of like performative allyship, and that's like very, very detrimental, you know. So like how are we breaking that down and actually like ensuring that we are taking care of each other is what I would say kinship solidarity looks like.
Thanks, William. I would say what kinship solidarity looks like to me for Black liberation is just daily actions of, what we do with our family in relation to ourselves and our community work. So for me, that's birth work, and that's also been farming and seed saving and land restoration work. So it's kinship to me is not just this human to human relationship, but the relationship to just everything in the universe: plants, waters, animals, soil, the wind. It's this larger kinship system of all living things to me. And how we, take those steps towards liberation, I think can be done in so many different ways, on a spiritual level, to community organizing, to just even like checking on your elders and calling your grandma. Like kinship is something so like beautiful in our lives that I think we forget that we really are connected to so many things, but also first and foremost like ourselves. And we have to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves before we can take care of other people and other things. I'm done because my son just woke up too, so.
I can go next if you're okay with that, Ashley. So I believe that, in terms of allyship between people of color, and then again, it's to me different in terms of allyship from, people of European descent. But people of color, I just think it's really important for us to realize that we have a shared history in this fight, in this fight against like heteropatriarchy, like white supremacy, right? Like, if you look from across the board, across the globe, right? Like what has happened to like Black people is being enacted like upon like Indigenous people. What is like happening to like Asian people. Again, when you look at America as a structure, like any person that has come here that has not fallen into whiteness has experienced the same thing, right? So like some of the greatest people, in terms of like Black liberation have been able to kind of do this, right? In terms of like uniting farm workers and uniting Indigenous peoples and like fighting for like land rights. And showing how like that is exactly what is like in going on with like people of color, Black people in America, right? Like having their land stolen, their identity stolen, like their languages stolen, like and being put to work to build wealth for white people. So that's what I say to like allies of color. But when it comes to allies of European descent, I think I think of it in terms of being a man addressing patriarchy, right? Like it's not going to happen if I'm only doing it when women are around, right? So like I talk about like in terms of like white allies, like if you only are gunning for Black Lives Matter, like on social media or like in front of your Black friends, I'm like, okay, that's great. But like when you're hanging out with your really cool white friend and he's like, look at that, right? And you don't say anything, you're not really gunning for, like, you're not really like on like riding for me. You're not really my ally, right? And I feel like it's really important for me to voice that. Like there are white people who I talk great with, but when I'm not around and people are anti-Black and you say nothing, then you're not an ally. And for me, I think it's really important to put those things out there, because there are people who think that, even in our little town in Gallup, New Mexico, like during the Black Lives Matter kind of like the big thing, they wanted to paint a sign on the street that said disarm racism. And they did paint a sign on the street that said disarm racism. And to me, it's like, so first and foremost, if you can't even just paint Black Lives Matter on the friggin' floor, right? Like, how like ride or die are you? But then like what? Like, do you want your racism armed? Like, I mean, like, yeah, like, would you rather your racism like with no guns, like disarm racism? Like, what is that, right? And it's this kind of like, I think William mentioned it earlier, like these like platitudes, like these kind of like I'm down for the cause, but I still don't want my kids to go to Black schools, right? Like, I'm down for the cause, but like, if only that black guy like wasn't so disrespectful, you know, like those are the kind of things where I feel like people who consider themselves allies really need to like think about. And then on top of that, like in this work, the people who need to be on the front lines of Black Lives Matter without like, I don't know, not necessarily being black, but like understanding the black experience. And that's it. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Yes, so much here. All of y'all have said such great things. And I think for me, this idea of like kinship solidarity, like is kind of what I said, right? Like we've always taken care of each other. Like I grew up in Southern California, largely Black and Latinx was like my surroundings. And like there like, and in the 90s, right? So there was this huge idea of like what it meant to be Black in this community and what it meant to be brown in this community, right? And like this Black versus brown thing. And while I saw that, I saw some of that, right? But I mostly saw people talking about this idea because what I understood as a young child growing up in South Central LA was that, and then other communities in Southern California, was that my neighbors who were Latinx, who were Mexican, were the people who were looking out for me and my mom, right? And like, and vice versa, right? And so I understood that there was like this larger narrative that like Black and brown people didn't get along with each other, or that like Black people didn't get along with anybody else, or nobody else like got along with Black people. But in my own experience, I lived in a community that said, oh, you don't got it? I got it. You know, like, oh, you're hungry? Come on over. Like, what are you even talking about? Why would you even be hungry? Like, you should have never even gotten hungry because obviously there's food here. Like, you know, like, oh, you don't have someone to take care of that baby while you go to that job interview? Bring the baby over here. Your baby is my baby. Like that kind of collective mindset is something that I grew up in. And so I've carried that with me in all of my work, but also in the ways that I interact with other folks who are, I always say, like living on the margins, right? Or living under the guise of oppression. And I think that for me, it's so important for us to carry that mindset. Like Black folks always say, like, it takes a village, right? And so my village looks, because of where I am, because I'm on Turtle Island, because I am living in communities that are predominantly people who have been colonized by whiteness and, like, you know, oppressed by white supremacy. My village looks like all of us on this panel, right? Like my village looks like so many different types of Blackness. My village looks like Indigenous folks. My village looks like South American folks. Like it looks like all of us. And so I think that that's the vision I carry. And I know this sounds really bad, and I'm not even sure I should entirely say it, but I'll say it because it's who I am. Like I've moved away from even, how do I say it? Hold on. I've moved away from expecting white people to be allies or even accomplices, right? I've moved away. Like if you're coming along, like I need you to show me, and if you show me, cool, like hop in. If you don't, then guess what, we're doing this shit without you anyway, because like your whiteness has never created space for my liberation and the liberation of the people that I love and like interact with on a daily basis. So we've got to find a way to create that outside of your allyship or your permission, right? And so that's something that I've been really focusing on. And I love what Andrea said about this kinship to the universe and to the land, like not just human to human, but also like, how are we being stewards of this land that we are on, you know, and this land that we were stolen to, right? But also like has taken care of us and helped us survive. I hate this notion that Black people don't be outside. Like, we be outside. Right? Thank you, William. I saw that. I hate this notion. We have always been outside, and the land has always fostered us and taken care of us when people didn't, right? And the only reason why there is this notion and there is this lie is because white folks made it unsafe for Black people to be outside. And so we've got to like shed it. It's kind of like in The Wiz when they I don't know if y'all seen The Wiz, I'm so old, but like The Wiz, they like shed these suits, right? And they're just like dancing, and it's like, can you feel a brand new day? That's what I see Black liberation as, and that's what I see liberation for all of us who are affected by colonization as. Like, we just got to get there.
Thank you, everyone. You all brought up some really amazing key points to talking about these issues. We have one last question before we open up the Q&A. And the question is, what does Black liberation look like beyond singular acts of solidarity?
I think that internally, for one thing, you know, Ashley talked before about respectability politics, and I think that it really comes into play a lot in Black communities of making sure you're dressing the right way, right? I believe Elijah McCain was a young person who was just recently killed in Colorado, and you know, when again, as a Black immigrant to America, with immigrants' parents, you have this respectability politics, like your parents play, you know, they constantly beat into you. And I feel like Elijah McCain is like this perfect, there are so many perfect examples of right? Like, I mean, when I say perfect example, there's so many examples of Black people, lawyers, doctors, politicians, you know, like being arrested and being beaten, being killed by the police. But to me, just like the most recent one is just like this Elijah McCain in the video, and like, right, like how much more respectable do you need to be, and you still get killed by the state in America, right, the police state. So for me, I think that, again, having like gone to like these like fancy universities, I grew up with the respectability politics, right, like people wearing their pants a certain way, or like certain type of music people listen to. And I think that for like, yeah, like breaking that is one of the big things of what Black solidarity could look like, right? Like, doesn't matter if a Black person lives in a trailer park. It doesn't matter if a Black person does sex work. It doesn't matter what they do. They are human beings, right? We don't need to defend their humanity to anyone, right? Again, it doesn't matter if rioters burn buildings. Like a burnt building is not a Black life, right? And at the end of the day, the whole argument with this whole thing isn't that Black people don't kill Black people and white people don't kill white people. It's just a lack of accountability of like police officers or even just regular white citizens when they kill Black people, right? So again, like for me, like pointing out that the whole like respectability politics, like we shouldn't be falling into it as people of color. And then externally, as we just mentioned before, it's just like I think that going beyond a singular act is just seeing Black people as human beings. And yeah, that's like that's it.
I really appreciate you guys all saying that and like bringing up the respectability politics. I think that that's like so paramount to like a lot of our development, and just like especially the way I grew up, and like really understanding that people will view me a different way if I do these things. If I go to school, if I study this, if I have this type of vernacular, this type of language, this type of appearance, you know, and that's just not the case, you know. So definitely breaking away from that and like stop the code switching, you know, and just be. and then also providing opportunity, you know, like I'm thinking a lot about equity, and I love equality and all, but just like at this point, I just don't understand, or I can't comprehend how we can treat everyone the same way. We need to treat everyone at least equitably when it comes to these different things, because we don't have these things. We don't have generational wealth. We don't have opportunities. We're not represented in academia or any other spaces, you know. So I'm thinking about that a lot. I'm thinking about the points Ashley brought up as an environmentalist about like this narrative that like we're not outside, that we're not doing these things, you know. I think that this singular act of solidarity of just people like plastering Black Lives Matter onto like a mural or something isn't enough, or like these environmental organizations, you know, that have always focused on conservation methods and animal welfare and all these things that are actually starting to like reach out to us. That's not enough. And to represent it in these spaces and their executive boardrooms and leadership as well, you know, and like being in this space and like being an advocate, it's like you're always tokenized all the time. So if you're going to do this to me, like you're going to have to need like a lot more representation so I don't feel this way. So it's not that way. And then I need to be compensated as well. You know, I think that going into like the anti-capitalist rhetoric, that you're really breaking down that, you know, like you're breaking down these systems of oppression when you're actually compensating and treating people well for their time, you know. I'm thinking of everyone just not being free until like everyone's free, you know. So I'm thinking of like land recognition and giving land back, you know, and then also just our internalized capitalism has thought that how is that even possible? And then it's really just thinking about like these lands, these opportunities, all this stuff. You should have a sense of ownership over it, you know, like it's just there. You practice reciprocity, like you give to it, it gives back to you, giving people like more autonomy over these different things, you know. So that's what liberation past singular acts of solidarity looks like to me, is stop saying that you care about it and actually start doing, you know. And when you start doing, stop asking for thank you, stop asking for us to write little cards and letters with our face on it, like thank you for helping all the Black and brown children, you know, like that's not enough, you know. Like we need opportunity, we need to be represented, and we just need that. We need equity, is what Black liberation is looking like to me past these singular forms of solidarity.
Yeah. Whew. Like the first thing that came to my mind when I thought of this question, or thought of the answer to this question, is that like beyond single acts of solidarity, like you're all talking, like there's so much performative allyship happening right now. I can say just in Salt Lake City alone, right? Like Black Lives Matter was painted on the street, and it's a beautiful mural in front of the city council building, but like Black and brown protesters are getting charged with felonies for throwing paint during a protest, you know. So like there's like a definite cognitive dissonance there, even amongst white folks who believe that they are allies. So like the first thing that came to mind for me, to be honest, was like, just leave us the hell alone, man. Like step back. We don't even need your like random acts of solidarity, right? Like without like, and this is what I mean when I say like you got to show me you're an accomplice, right? And I think that this goes for this goes for white folks, but this also goes for non-Black people of color as well, especially those who benefit from their proximity to whiteness. Like you need to show me that you are an accomplice, and I mean like the most dramatic of ways, for me to be able to like look at you and say like, okay, I see you, I see what you're doing, like let's get this work together, you know. On the other hand, like if you are not about that life, and I hate to like use the common like Instagram colloquialism here, but like if you ain't about that life, I need for you to get out of my way, right? And I need for you to, oh, my dog just peed on the floor. I'm sorry. I need for you to get out of our way and leave us alone, because like there's this idea, right, that this country doesn't want Black people, and they don't appreciate us, and they kind of wish that we'd just be like over here, like out of their view, on our own, just like leaving them alone, when in fact it's the other way around. Is like, y'all just won't leave us alone. We try our hardest to like divest from you and to do the shit on our own and pull ourselves up by the bootstraps, as you say, and create our own communities and create our own systems. And then every single time we do, here comes like white supremacy and like coming to blow us up, or to ruin it, or to kill us, or to jail us, you know? And so it's like, it's got to be one or the other. And I prefer it be the other, where y'all just leave us alone so we can do what we do. Like, stand by your word. If you don't want us, then let us just be us. Let us just be over here doing our own shit. And so, like, that's honestly, in the most authentic ways, that's what it looks like for me. Like, I don't need your guilt. I don't need your random $5 Venmos. I don't need your murals on the street in front of the buildings that like uphold your systems. I don't need any of that, right? Like, I just need y'all to leave me alone so that I can get with my people and we can build the village that we need for our babies to survive, and for our babies to like not only survive but to thrive, right? Because we know that we can thrive in what we build. We know that if y'all would just let us, we could thrive in the knowledge that we have, and the villages that we build, and the safe spaces that we hold for each other. And so that's all I'm looking for. That's all I'm looking for. And that's my answer.
Thank you, Ashley. Yeah, I think everyone really touched upon what accomplices or allies can do beyond singular acts. I just think of, we need to abolish capitalism, get rid of the prison system, dramatically reformat or just create new educational, I don't even want to say institutions, but new forms of education that are holistic and that we can learn history in a true way, and to just, I don't know, I'm thinking like reparations, land back, like these larger systematic structural things that we can break down and really, there is a possible way. If like all this oppression was able to happen, like there are new ways to create communities where we can thrive. Like we shouldn't just be defined by our oppression or our deficits. Like there's so much that we bring to the world as Black people globally, not just in the United States, but everywhere in the world, that that so much has been untapped and suppressed, that there's just so many endless possibilities. And we just need that support. And like Ashley's saying, like people just kind of need to step back. Like if they're not willing to do that or be that, then just step aside and let us have that space.
Yeah, and you know, Ashley, I saw you just respond to Wyatt's comment, and I feel like gentrification is something that's along those lines. But at the end of the day, gentrification is the name for a couple of these different things, right? Gentrification is like whiteness as safety, right? Like white people coming into communities of color, and then which increases like police presence, right, to like protect that whiteness, right? Like it's not to me. I feel like gentrification kind of puts the blame on the yuppie artist or like the college schoolgirl who's like moving into the Black community, when it's like there's more than just that, right? It's like the racist practice of like housing, right? Like how these people are able to get into these apartments or into these communities to get housing in the first place, and then the policing in these communities and Black communities. And you know, I read this story about how like where like police would pull up to like white people in black neighborhoods and ask them like are y'all okay here, right? Like you don't see them doing the same thing to like black people in black neighborhoods or black people in white neighborhoods. But just like how right gentrification is just so much more than like white people getting like affordable housing in communities of color, right? And like more and more white people moving in. It's like the insidious like violence that is also there as well. And so, yeah, it's kind of like when Ashley said earlier about black people and being outside and how like white people made it like we were afraid to go outside, right? The same thing with like gentrification. It's like this police presence, this like threat of violence, I think is also like this like pushing factor behind this gentrification of communities of color. And it's been going on from the jump. And I think that this really goes into like the history. And again, I was talking before about how like blackness is this kind of monolithic thing compared to like other things, right? Like where a black person from Chicago is kind of like viewed as the same like person as like a black person from like the Mississippi Delta. Whereas like when you talk about like peoples, right? Like there's all these like nuances to them. But as black people, we don't get to have these nuances, right? Like and I think that like again, like this is the insidiousness of like racism, of colonization, and this is something I feel like we should be like addressing in the black community is like the differences, the intricacies between all of us. And gentrification is like one of the things that led to like a big movement of black people from like our like from the South like to these big cities, but like from like these land plots where we have like had histories to these big cities where like a lot of black people like no longer like remember like where they're from or like where their ancestors came from, and this is like very purposefully done. And like again, gentrification is something that's very purposely done as a part of like white supremacy, not this like thing that like happens like by accident. My little spiel.
Yes,
I love that.
Yes, many snaps going around to these responses here. Thank you all for answering those questions for us and bringing up really powerful and important points to this conversation. The Q&A is open for those who are listening in to submit your questions. And I just want to set out a reminder that those who are submitting questions to take a moment of reflection before submitting them. For sake of time, we can only allow maybe 1 or 2 questions to be answered. But I will just wait a moment here to have those those questions flow in.
And I also wanted to remind folks that after this panel is over, we are breaking into our racial justice caucuses, which will have a Black-only space for folks to process, which is going to be led actually by Ashley. We will also have a non-Black POC space for folks to process as well. And then we will also have a white folks caucus for white folks also to process. So even if you have questions that maybe you don't feel comfortable bringing out into this space, we are setting intentional spaces afterwards for folks to process and to think about these topics, because, you know, I know that for, at least for myself as a non-Black person, sometimes when I think about this, I'm just like, oh my God, my non-Black guilt just guilts me and drags me down. And it's like, no, stop feeling guilty and do something. Like actually do something and engage in liberation processes, right? So yeah, we look forward to strategizing with y'all afterwards.
Yes, thanks for that reminder, Ella. And we'll just wait a few moments here for any questions to come in. And a reminder as well, to submit a question, if you place your mouse along the bottom of the screen, there's a little Q&A button, and you're also welcome to submit it via the chat as well. The Q&A function is not working for you all.
Hey, Ashley. I mean, this isn't a question from anyone except for me, but you know, it'd be really interesting to hear about your experience if you have time. I mean, I think you're on Instagram, all right? Would love to follow you, but just what's going on up there in Salt Lake? I did see recently about the felony charges for those people, like the two people for throwing paint, and just wondering like if you're on the front lines of like working with not working with these people particularly, but just like with the Black Lives Matter and like scheduling these protests, like how you're feeling, especially with like Trump trying to move in with these like federal people, like how you're feeling doing this kind of activism work.
Yeah, so I recently, with a group of other Black women, have started a local chapter, Black Lives Matter Salt Lake City, which is not to be confused with Black Lives Matter Utah. I just need to put that disclaimer out there. And I think I'll be so honest with you. I am incredibly exhausted because I think like one of the things that's really exhausting about Salt Lake City specifically, but I think in this kind of liberation work in general, is that when you're a person or an organizer or like you have a group, right, that's like really trying to focus on this, on abolition, right, and like this idea of abolition and like complete like radical liberation, it can be really exhausting because like on one hand, right, like I'll just speak for myself. I won't even speak for my group right now, but I'll speak for myself as an organizer, just like as a Black woman in general. Like I'm seeing like all that's happening in Salt Lake. I'm seeing Trump being like, you know, I'm going to increase the retaliation essentially on those who are protesting. And like the radical in me is just like so incredibly angry and like fired up, right? But also like very exhausted and just tired. Because on the other hand, then you have like all of these groups who are just like placating, right, the systems that be, the powers that be. So like we have people who won't just come out and say, and these are like people who are leaders, right, in this work, who won't just come out and say like, this is wrong, y'all are racist, we see what you're doing here, like we completely and totally denounce this, and like won't let, like when we talk about respectability, won't let themselves be vulnerable or visceral in their reactions to this. And this is just, it's frustrating for me. It's exhausting for me. And so I don't mean to like use your question as a way to vent. That's not what I'm trying to do. So I just want to like be clear, but I just also want to say that that while I do believe we need like all hands on deck, and that can look a lot of different ways, that it can also be really tiring to be a person who looks at the problem and looks at the system and is like, you know what, like we have to call a spade a spade. We have to call this what it is. We have to call this state-sanctioned violence. We have to call this the President of the United States willingly and obviously like saying that it is okay for governmental forces to come and essentially kill, right, like folks for protesting something that they should have the right to protest, but also that should be protested, right, like that should be like fought against. We have to have people who are willing to stand up and say that in a way that is completely honest and like no holds barred and like completely like we need to be vulnerable in this work. And I think that that's really important because we've been taught, right, like we were talking about, we've been taught like if you just say things nicely, and if you sit there quietly with a smile on your face, and if you shake hands, that's the way change is going to come. But like, how many hands have been shook? How many ties have been tied? How many like smiles at press conferences have been smiled? And look what's happening. Like, we're still getting killed. The police in Salt Lake City, Utah, the place that people like to tout as a very peaceful, non-violent, welcoming place, the police in Salt Lake City, Utah are shooting people in the back, right? And like, we don't have time to placate. We don't. And so that's my answer. I hope that answered your question. I don't know. I think Kern is freezing a little bit, but is it me? Am I freezing as well?
No. It's definitely me. I'm trying to like answer. I saw this question about how Black liberation is in reference to environmental justice, and I was just trying to. So, can you talk more about how Black liberation relates to environmental justice in your life and work? And I guess this is to all of us. And I was just thinking about that question before, and I was just going back and forth, and I think that was the glitching. But just for this question really quickly, I think that, again, both of these things have to do with, like, the overarching system of white supremacy. And, right, like, environmental justice has to do with this destruction of the environment, like, again, like putting it into use for like the production of energy, which leads to like environmental racism, where again, usually people of color end up living around these places, right? So like the majority of uranium mines in America is on the indigenous lands, right? Like a lot of places where Black people or again, like people of color, Hispanic people are forced to live in America have to do with places where there's like higher air pollution. When we're looking, just like in Chicago, I think maybe 2 or 3 months ago, like when COVID was just starting up, they demolished this building in this poor Hispanic neighborhood, and there was smoke and dust everywhere. And this is when it was coming out about how COVID could travel on dirt particles and all these things, or pollution particles. And that when you look at environmental impacts on people, it's disproportionately people of color, all right? So like to me, Black liberation, when you talk about it, it might seem as if it's one thing, like it's over here, and then, and the environmental justice is this completely different thing, but it's so tied together, right? Like from missing and murdered Indigenous women to, like our relatives south of the border, like traversing this border. These are all things that have been created by white supremacy, right? Like these are not individual issues. These are not this one thing here in this area and this other thing completely different that Black people are dealing with, right? Like the theft of native land has to do directly with the enslavement of Black bodies, right? Like the reason why so many Black people, so many Indigenous people, so many Hispanic people fill American prisons isn't because we are more murderers, right? Again, as I said earlier, if you look at history, like across the board, like European people have gone to like everyone's continent and just like killed them, right? So in terms of like murderers, right, like we are not more murderers, but we occupy these prisons because we do the labor, right? So environmental justice, this destruction of the environment, this destruction of the land, ties so closely into this across the board, like again, LGBTQ issues, mining issues, water right issues. These are all in kind of direct response or, I guess, conflict with white supremacy.
Amazing job, Kern. Yeah, that was an incredible answer. Like one example that I'll use, and I'll just use it quickly because I know like I want to give time to everyone to answer, but so Salt Lake City is where I live currently. I previously lived in Los Angeles, California, which also has like a very high rate of pollution. But Salt Lake City has this has really poor air quality. We made the news like nationally and globally for how bad the air quality is here, especially in the wintertime, because there's this thing called inversion where like the pollution gets stuck in the valley And scientists have like studied inversion and studied pollution and studied their air quality, and have come to the conclusion, like, which is like, really, you had to do all of that to know this, but come to the conclusion that air quality is directly affecting birth outcomes. It's also directly affecting life expectancy for children. Like, the air quality gets so bad here that there are days when the school will not let children go outside to play during recess. And so, but I say that to say this. I say that, like, yes, all over Salt Lake Valley, it's bad, right? But when we think about the communities here that live closer to refineries and factories that are directly like breathing in the things that the air that causes inversion and causes these like adverse birth effects and causes these adverse birth outcomes and causes these kids to develop asthma and respiratory disease and lung disease. It's all people of color. It's Black, brown, Polynesian, indigenous people who are living in these areas. And so I think, like, to answer your question, this is a direct example of how environmental justice, but more specifically environmental abuse, affects Black lives, right? And like, who is being subjected in the worst ways to the environmental abuse and the effects that happen because of environmental abuse? It's us. And it's people that look like me, and people that look like Andrea, and people that look like Kern and William and Mariela. You know, like, it's us. And it's killing us. It's one of the things that is killing us. But yeah, I like what Kern said about it all being kind of the raindrop under this cloud of white supremacy.
So when I'm thinking of that question, I really think in terms of like recognition. So this is actually like the field I study, and I definitely try to bring these topics up all the time. And like in some ways, it's like really great and people are activated, and then in other ways, like I get tokenized for it. Like I have other research interests and other things that I'm passionate about that are past DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion frameworks and environmental justice. I just don't always get to focus on them because I'm Black, you know. So I'm thinking about like really uplifting these voices in that, and like recognizing like your privilege. Like, why is it that like within my school, the things I'm studying, and within my community, I'm essentially the only one, you know, and the only one talking about these things, you know, when really it's these BIPOC communities that pioneered and started, you know, sustainability, started conservation, you know. They don't have fancy words of academia, you know, that are rooted within institutionalized racism and white supremacy to like really uphold that, you know. Why is it that like my grandmother, who was basically a sharecropper, which is basically slavery back in the day, you know, and it still goes on in some spaces, like knows more about soil chemistry and agriculture and all these like intricate food systems than any professor will ever teach me in my life. And I realized, I thought that like it was never a part of my life, but then I realized like growing up, it's always been that, you know. Why is it that zero waste systems focus on like this surface level aspect of recycling and doing this and doing your part, and really just merchandising capitalism and like buying all these fancy products, you know, and like the face of that is basically like a white girl with dreadlocks with 20 mason jars and $30 bamboo, you know, metal straws or whatever, you know. Why is it not like those different like Black communities that literally like share everything, you know, and save everything and reuse everything? And why are we not focusing on like those like capitalistic and like patriarchal and like I guess colonial systems that are diverting waste to like these minority communities, and that things such as like, you know, stolen land, decolonization, slavery, industrial revolution, and so many things even to this day have like caused the systems that we see, you know. Why are we not focusing on that? So when I'm really thinking of that question, I'm thinking about how are we highlighting voices, how are we giving recognition, and how are we giving a sense of greater power and agency by recognizing that and knowing that this is not anything new, you know. So thank you for whoever asked that question. I really appreciate it.
There was a joke online, and it was actually very accurate. I love what William was saying about, like, we've been out here, like, on the forefront of this sustainability, like, fight. But the joke was, like, when y'all are talking about the pollution of or like plastic in the oceans, it was like, don't look at, have you seen it? Like, it's like, don't look at Black people because all
and
of
it's
our
like a
plastic
well,
bags.
like, exactly. Literally, like, none of
What
our
was
plastic bags are, it was something about, I don't know if it's the same one, but it's something about whales, and, like, the whale washed up on shore and had all the plastic and stuff in its stomach, and it's like, I don't take credit for that. Like, all of mine are under the sink.
It was like all of our plastic bags are in the sink in another plastic bag.
Or used for, like, deep conditioning your hair, you know, stuff like that. Like, reuse everything, you know. We don't need, like, those fancy, like, $30 products to do that, you know. And they're not necessarily, like, sustainable. You know, sustainability by definition is ensuring that we're meeting our needs now without compromising that in future generations. But where is that equity aspect in that, you know? And, like, really what I'm saying now is that it's not even, like, really sustainability. It's just purchasing power, you know? It's privilege. And we need to move past that within, like, so many different spaces.
Andrea, I don't know if you're going to say something.
Go ahead, sorry.
No, Andrea, the only thing I was just going to say really quickly is I feel like, you know, for like most definitely these issues affect POC, people of color, like intentionally. But the thing about the destruction of the environment is that eventually it comes like to all of us, right? Like, I think about like Standing Rock, where at the beginning these people are like, oh, these Indians just want to stop the water from blah blah blah, and then when the actually freaking spilled, like you saw how many people were affected by this, right? There was this spill, I believe it was like in Kentucky about 3 or 4 years ago, where they literally had to shut down 2 million people's drinking water, right? When you start looking at these issues, like, yes, right now this waste is being dumped in indigenous communities, or right now this waste is being dumped in Black communities. But the beauty of Mother Nature is that it doesn't stick to redlining, right? Like, water doesn't flow based on where you've made like your arbitrary boundaries, right? Like, smog pollution doesn't just stay in Black communities. And you might start it there, but this is eventually coming to all of us. And this is why I keep on saying this is like everyone's battle. Like, white supremacy, like the destruction of our environment, like this reliance on energy extraction, the way we do it, like this is going to be affecting all of us sooner or later. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Kern. I totally agree with you that when we talk about Black Lives Matter or Black and Brown solidarity, like it's only for the betterment of all people. We're not being exclusive to just our groups, and there's such that disconnect. But I wanted to go on to the next question, which is, there have been so many hierarchical, can't say that, systems of land ownership and capitalism around the globe that have historically affected Black people of all diasporas across history, even before European colonization. Do you see an acknowledgement of that when working with non-Black POC who are attempting to do this work? Do I see that acknowledgement? I would say not really. I think people, when it comes to talking about systems of land ownership, I feel like people aren't really thinking about really marginalized people in general. I feel like it's always the oppressed that kind of have to voice their concerns. And with other non-Black POC, I think that's a crucial step in solidarity that's missing at this moment. But I would love to hear from the other panelists how they feel about that.
I think that the question of land ownership, I think it's a really hard question, just because in terms of like, right, we're asking about things across history, and then before colonization and post colonization, it's just for me, it's hard to contextualize. But at the end of the day, if I do see people acknowledging that, I think it comes back to my thing. If y'all haven't realized, I'm like a history nerd. So like history gets me going. And I think that like acknowledging the work that Black people have done on the land, like takes like, it doesn't take like a whole knowledge of history. It just takes like a little bit of that. And again, Ashley mentioned this earlier, William mentioned this, Andrea mentioned it. Like we've just been so separated and disconnected from our history and from our past that like, I think that, yeah, we just need to like to remake that connection, like make that connection. As Ashley was talking about, like Black people being outside, like we've been outside, right? Like that connection has been there. Andrea, like you're talking about like with your midwifery work, like again, like Black people have been birthing children, right? Since before they forced us over here, right? Like this is our history, and it. I think it's really important for us as Black people, or for Black people, to acknowledge our history first, and then like be able to start going out there and like letting others like know it. I don't know. I think that just like Black land ownership and stewardship is a really difficult thing, just because it's like, right, like who gives you ownership of land? Like how do you get ownership of land? And in America, that's been a very like, again, like Eurocentric thing. You know, just thinking about personally, I'm from Trinidad, and Trinidad's like now Afro-Caribbean Black people and East Indian people from India, and right, like so after slavery was outlawed, the English imported a bunch of Indian servants, and after the Indian servants worked for a couple of years, they were then granted land. So you have situations in Trinidad where people who came in after, like, again, like Trinidadians believe themselves to be descendants of Trinidadian Afro-Caribbean people, right? Like who, like they feel like they rightfully own the land, but land has been granted, right, to East Indian, like servants, right? So when you look at the land today, it's like who has ownership, right? Obviously, like Black people don't own the land, and they don't like they no longer care for it in the same way as it did before. But just like, I'm really sorry, y'all. Going off into this whole like offshoot, blah, blah, blah. The whole thing to me is just like how important history is, and understanding why we are where we are, and like how, you know, to potentially find solutions to moving forward.
I guess okay, so like I was reading this question, and I guess to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what the question is asking, and that could just be because I'm hungry and I'm having a hard time like like comprehending. But I guess how I've interpreted the question is that like I guess I'm kind of focusing on this idea of like where this person has written even before European colonization, and like if there is an acknowledgement when I'm working with non-Black POC about that. I think that's a hard question for me to answer, honestly, because most of the work that I do with non-Black people of color are people who have been colonized like by Europeans, like who are literally their lineage is a result, like a direct result of European colonization, just as mine is. And so I don't know if this is what you were asking specifically, or if I'm focusing on the wrong part of the question, but yeah, I think they're like the folks that I organize with often like will recognize that we are on stolen land, right? And that I am the descendant of stolen people, and that many of us are. And so like this idea of stewardship versus ownership is a thing that we've been kind of exploring a lot in my circles, because while folks were like, again, stolen to this land, like my folks were stolen to this land, and were were forced to work this land, right? And then like develop a relationship to the land through this really big traumatic thing that happens in history. Like, as a person who's aware, I also want to make sure that I am also honoring the fact that this is stolen land. Like, I'm a stolen person on stolen land, right? So, like, where do I fit in this conversation of, like, getting land back and, like, ownership versus stewardship, you know? And I tend to lean towards stewardship, because at this moment, you know, I'm not, like, looking to, like, when I talk about liberation and Black liberation, I'm not looking to, like, replicate like the stealing of land, right? I don't know. Does that answer? I guess I'm just kind of thinking out loud, trying to work my way through the question. But
Ashley, I think that's really interesting. I think that's again, because there is this conversation behind like Black liberation and Indigenous liberation, right? And like the whole like land back movement of giving Indigenous people their land back. And yeah, again, as a Black person living on Indigenous lands and like engaging in these topics, I completely agree. I think that's a really like important conversation to be had, but also like, again, Black liberation doesn't mean Black people will then start buying up and stealing Native land, right? Just like, to me, like Native liberation doesn't mean like Native people then want to be able to freaking throw Black people in prison at like a crazy rate, right? Like, I think it's a really interesting the way that you put it, like in terms of stewardship and ownership. This is like kind of like one of the like first times hearing someone put it like that, so it'd be awesome for me to continue like looking into conversations like that. I think it's really important. So it seems like we're going to be wrapping up soon. This is great. I think it's really important to like mention like, right, like the lateral violence that comes like in these movements as well, right? Like, and for me, it's important to tie it together as opposed to like tearing it apart. And when I say this, I think about in 2016 at Standing Rock and how like that was such a huge movement for Indigenous like bringing to the forefront of American public, American media, like this like battle Indigenous people have been fighting for a long time, and how, you know, like I saw, at least like where I was at, like a lot of Indigenous people at the end of Standing Rock, like taking stuff over to Flint, right, and like connecting like the battle that was going on in Flint, that was going on with like Indigenous peoples. When you look at like police murders, right? Like Native American men are like the leading people getting killed by like the police, right? When we look at incarceration rates, like our struggles are united, right? Like, so me saying Black Lives Matter is not me saying Indigenous people don't matter, right? And I feel like it's important for us as Black people, as well as like Chicano people, when it comes to like this missing, murdered Indigenous woman, like whatever you're on the forefront, like people, we are struggling against white supremacy. We are not struggling against each other, and it's really important to like have that out there, to like have like our groups like recognize this, because the more that we fight amongst each other, like the easier it is for the system to like break us down.
Yeah, I think that's important to say. And I also think it's important to uplift the history that like traditionally Black folks have brought everybody on their struggle. You know, like we've always been like, yeah, come here, like we getting free, you know, like we're getting free together. And so and like I just want to uplift that, like exactly what you said. But also someone said that Kern, they wanted to uplift and center your love for history. They share the same passion for it. History gives the context of how things began and how things come to be. For example, The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander gave some great historical background, and it inspired me to look into more history. Also, after the Emmanuel 9 horror, I did a deep dive into the history of the AME Church and how important politics have always been for Black folks. So affirming Kern for the importance of history. Yeah. Has everyone said what they'd like to say? Andrea, I feel like your baby has some things to say about this conversation, and I feel like they haven't gotten the chance to speak their mind.
Oh, there he is. Yeah.
That's right, little one. Say your piece.
I just wanted to thank you all so much for this incredible conversation. And it has been such a joy and such a pleasure to have all of you here with us. Thank you for your insights, your wisdom, and yeah, thank you for just being here. Like, damn, you know, Kern, when you were talking about Standing Rock, I was getting emotional because I realized that's probably the last time I saw you. um, and you know, that just reminds me of the history and of the deep roots that this community has. With each other, even if we're meeting maybe for the first time here visually, or if we're gonna see each other face to face right on the front line someday. I wanna go ahead and start transitioning us into our caucuses now, if that's okay. It's 3:42 here Mountain Time, which means we're gonna have roughly around a little less than an hour for us to caucus, which I think is enough time, right? For us to like have these conversations. We're also talking about pushing back the schedule a little bit, just to give folks room to breathe. We know that Zoom can be very, very overwhelming. There's all these screens and all these people. So as I just get so tired of looking into people's eyes. But yes, thank you all so much for this conversation. If you have any final thoughts, I invite you to share them with us, and then we'll start transitioning into our caucuses now.
Ella, will we be in, like, is it the same Zoom link for the caucus?
No, it's a different Zoom link because we won't be recording the caucuses. We want to respect y'all's privacy. Right. So this right now is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook. But okay. we're gonna make those private, and that's a separate Zoom link for that reason.
Thank you for clarifying.
But yeah, and if anybody has any closing thoughts, if not, we're gonna go ahead and transition into our caucuses. I'm just gonna give us maybe a few seconds to take a breath.
Hey, I'm sorry. I have a quick plug for whoever's on the phone. We're talking about Black liberation. I would really advise y'all to check out, like, wherever you're from, wherever you're at, like, the cops in your community get funded way more than almost anyone else. The defund the police movement, I think, is like something that's like worthwhile to check out. Whatever you're into, like whatever kind of justice movement you're into, it's not being funded enough, and the cops have like military grade weapons. Like, we need way more money, like, helping people on the ground than we do like criminalizing them. So I would like advise, you know, whoever you are, wherever you are, to like look into that, try to figure out how to support it. Yeah, my little plug.
I just wanted to thank you all for allowing me to be here and actually having this space. Great conversations came up, and I just can't wait to see all the solutions that come to all these different challenges that we face, and to just know that, like, we can all be in community and in solidarity with each other, and that we are in a changing world and we don't have to accept these systems that oppress us, and that we can move forward. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for having me here, and it's been such like a blessing and an honor to be on this panel with you all, because y'all are just phenomenal, and I'm so inspired by you and so motivated by you and your work and the ideas that you have, and would love to be in community with you beyond this.
Yes, thank you everyone for the attendees and the panelists. You're all doing such great work, and yeah, just thank you for having me, Uplift. And Cruz, my baby, says thank you.
Beautiful. Thank all of you panelists and attendees for being here as well. I think we are going to begin transitioning to the caucuses. Ella or Lyrica, I'm not quite sure if we're just going to transition directly from this Zoom link, but I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to you.
Yes. So you all should have gotten an email with a list of Zoom links for the day. And just go ahead and meet us in that general Zoom link, and then we'll take it from there and we'll assign you to your different breakout rooms. Again, we have the Black Caucus, the non-Black POC Caucus, and then the White Caucus. Also, if you need to take a break, please feel free to take a break and then come join us whenever you're ready. I think, yeah, we're gonna definitely push that schedule back. So yeah, thank you all so much, and we'll see you there.